Greetings, everyone. I'm here to assist you today. If this video helps you drift off to sleep, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel before you doze off. What's your location, and what time are you tuning in right now? Take a moment to unwind and enjoy the calm. That night began like any other long drive home, the road stretching endlessly before me, deserted and quiet, with only my headlights slicing through the darkness. It was the kind of night that felt desolate, where the only sound was the steady hum of the engine, occasionally interrupted by the rattle of a loose stone against the tires. I was an hour from home, cruising at a good pace, when I spotted it for the first time. It stood on the shoulder, just around a sharp curve, illuminated by the distant orange glow of a lamppost. At first, I thought it was a mirage, one of those tricks your eyes play after hours on the road. But as I drew closer, I realized it was no illusion. It was real, and it appeared frightened. I eased off the accelerator, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. She remained still, offering no sign to draw me in, just standing there, arms wrapped around herself as if caught in a chill, even with the warm night air surrounding us. Her attire was disheveled, a long coat draped loosely over her shoulders, and her hair appeared tangled, as though it had battled the wind for hours. Every instinct urged me to drive on, yet something in her gaze, in her quiet presence, held me captive. She halted my progress. I couldn't leave her alone in the middle of nowhere. I stopped a few feet ahead and glanced in the rearview mirror. She hesitated for a moment, then began walking toward the car. My heart raced more than it should have. I rolled down the window just a bit. "You're fine?" I asked, my voice echoing in the stillness of the night. She nodded but didn't say a word. Her eyes were wide, darting as if she expected something to leap from the shadows at any moment. "You need a ride?" I offered, looking at the empty road ahead. No other cars in sight, just us. She opened her mouth, paused for a heartbeat, then nodded again. I unlocked the passenger door and slid inside, moving cautiously, as if she wasn't sure of what to do next. As he placed his trust in me, the atmosphere within the car thickened palpably. I couldn't quite identify the source, but an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. I dismissed the feeling, convincing myself it was merely the pressure of the situation. Naturally, I felt a wave of nerves wash over me. Trouble was likely lurking nearby. Perhaps I was fleeing from someone or something. Yet, that still didn't clarify why I couldn't find a moment of calm. Upon my return to the road, he remained silent, his gaze fixed ahead, hands firmly clasped in his lap. Every now and then, I caught a glimpse of him from the side, attempting to decipher the unfolding scenario. After a minute, I inquired, "Where are you headed?" She slowly turned her head to meet my gaze, her dark, serious eyes fixed intently on mine. "Just drive," she murmured softly. That filled me with anxiety. I nodded and continued driving. The road unfurled before us, and with each mile, it felt as though we were the last two souls on earth. Not a single car drove by. The only illumination came from the rare flicker of a distant sign. The stillness was overwhelming. I cleared my throat, attempting to ease the palpable tension in the air. "Can you share what you were up to out there? Reaching out to someone would be fantastic." His response was not immediate. "I prefer to avoid making any calls." "It's all right," you whisper softly. I found myself fleeing from someone, an abusive boyfriend or something even more sinister. That idea sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't shake the thought that the one I was fleeing from might be out there searching for her. She likely sensed my unease. Breaking the stillness, she finally uttered a few words, her voice gentle and soothing. With a hint of uncertainty, she expressed, "Thank you for stopping me." I shot her a sideways glance, yet she remained fixated on the road ahead, her hands firmly clasped together. "Absolutely," I responded. "It appeared you were in need of assistance." "I needed it," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I was surprised anyone would actually stop, Caught off guard, I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded and focused on the road ahead. The atmosphere surrounding us thickened with unspoken inquiries, yet there was no weight. I simply continued to drive. After a few more moments of quiet, she abruptly adjusted her position in the seat and cast a quick, anxious glance at the rearview mirror. My stomach tightened at the sight of us. I inquired if someone was following us. I gazed into the mirror, and although the empty road stretched behind us, she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the reflection as if waiting for a revelation that eluded me. He ultimately shook his head, yet his expression stayed taut. Not at this moment. My hair stood on end as I gripped the steering wheel tightly, struggling to steady my breath. I felt compelled to inquire about his meaning, yet his posture, so rigid and alert, suggested he might prefer to keep his thoughts to himself. The journey stretched ahead, desolate and endless. As we drove further, a profound sense of isolation enveloped us. It felt like the world had vanished, leaving only the two of us in that car, stranded in the vast emptiness. Suddenly, a flicker of motion caught my eye, just at the periphery of the rear-view mirror. My heart raced, and I glanced back. Only darkness met my gaze, yet she caught the moment. She pivoted abruptly in her seat, her gaze locked onto the mirror, her body tensing with anticipation. "Did you see that?" she whispered. I was uncertain. I lacked clarity. I believed I caught a glimpse of something, but she was quick to notice it. "Keep driving," he interrupted, urgency lacing his voice. "Keep going." Without a second thought, I pressed the accelerator, and the car surged forward, the engine's growl breaking the stillness of the night. Road trips have always captured my heart. The open road unfolds ahead, offering a sense of freedom that beckons you to escape and embark on an adventure. You find yourself in a space of tranquility, free from the looming stress that awaits you at home. I had that thought in mind when I chose to take the scenic route. With ample time ahead of me, the idea of cruising down empty roads, just me and the horizon, felt like the perfect escape. Yet, as I traveled along that seemingly infinite stretch of pavement, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. It wasn't an abrupt sense of dread or a sense of looming danger crept into my thoughts like a subtle itch. It emerged gradually, barely noticeable at first, until I became aware of my white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel and my frequent glances in the rearview mirror. The road lay deserted, interrupted only by the distant growl of a passing trailer. Yet, that still didn't account for the pressure that had been mounting in my chest for hours. With no other cars in sight and no gas station around, the thought of pulling over started to feel increasingly enticing. At last, a sign emerged on the horizon, heralding a rest stop. Its blue letters struggled to stand out against the fading light. With a deep breath, I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I chose to step away from the road. I could take a moment to stretch my legs, visit the restroom, and perhaps dispel that peculiar sensation that surrounded me. The rest stop resembled countless others, tranquil, nearly abandoned, enveloped by dense woods on both sides, featuring a few picnic tables beneath a modest pavilion, and a vending machine humming gently by the entrance to the restrooms. After parking the car, I stepped out and inhaled the crisp afternoon air, stretching my stiff legs. The sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across the asphalt, creating a serene atmosphere. In the serene quiet, where the rest stop felt suspended in time, I made my way to the bathroom, my footsteps resonating in the calm of the surroundings. As I pushed the door open, an unusual sight greeted me. Typically, the space was bustling with people, but now it was eerily empty. Even at the most desolate stops, you might catch a glimpse of another wanderer, a truck driver, perhaps, or a family on a journey. But this place felt utterly lifeless. I shrugged my shoulders, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. The bathroom was surprisingly clean, yet the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting odd shadows on the walls. As I washed my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that the room seemed larger than it ought to be, as if the space had stretched since my arrival. I reassured myself that it was merely a trick of the peculiar lighting, but then I heard a whisper. I froze, my hands still beneath the running water. I initially dismissed it as the wind or the hum of the vending machine outside, but this time the whisper grew clearer, as if someone stood right behind me, muttering softly enough that I couldn't grasp the words. I turned quickly, my heart racing, only to find the bathroom empty. No one else was there. I paused for a moment, staring into the mirror, attempting to rationalize what I had just heard. I had thought it was just the pipes or some random noise from the building, but the longer I lingered, the more the unsettling feeling intensified. The air felt heavier. It was almost suffocating, the sensation prickling the hairs on the back of my neck. I spotted a hedgehog, quickly grabbed a paper towel, and dried my hands as fast as I could. I practically ran to the door, eager to return to the safety of my car. The fresh air hit me as I stepped outside. Once more as I stepped outside, yet the unease coiling in my stomach persisted as I made my way through the parking lot. Upon my arrival, I realized the RV was absent, or perhaps it simply slipped my mind to notice it. The interior lights were extinguished, devoid of any signs of life, enveloped in silence and darkness, as if it had been forsaken. Yet, an unsettling sensation lingered, as though unseen eyes were fixed upon me. I reminded myself that I was being foolish. It was merely an empty vehicle. As I rushed to my car, I couldn't resist stealing a glance at the traveler, likely taking a moment to recharge before continuing his journey. The windows were tinted, yet the longer I gazed at them, the more convinced I became that someone or something was watching me from within. I revved the engine in El Paso, a chill creeping down my spine. I slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door with purpose, and ensured the soundtrack was just right. Music. The RV stood slightly ajar, swaying gently with the breeze whispered through the air, and though I hadn't heard a door open or seen anyone emerge in the fading light of dusk, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure by the driveway, silently observing me. Panic seized me as I pressed the accelerator, and the car surged forward, leaving the RV in my rearview mirror as I drove away. The sensation of being observed lingered, sticking to me like an unshakable shadow. I glanced into the rearview mirror. Time and again, I anticipated the glow of the RV's lights trailing behind me, yet the road behind stayed desolate. The highway lay shrouded in darkness, devoid of cars or lights, creating an eerie and desolate scene. An unsettling feeling crept back in, jolting me in my seat as I gripped the steering wheel tightly, turning my tires a ghostly white. The whisper lingered gently, almost lost amidst the hum of tires on the pavement, yet it remained present. The familiar whisper echoed again, just like in the bathroom. This time, the words were nearly within reach. Even though the sounds were warped, reminiscent of someone speaking beneath the waves, I switched off the radio, assuming it was just interference. Yet, the whisper lingered, refusing to fade away. Halt! A wave of tension gripped my chest, panic rising, a feeling of suffocation closing in. As I surveyed my surroundings, my heart raced wildly within my chest. The vehicle stood silent, yet the whisper lingered on. Halt! Pay attention! I resolutely shook my head, compelling myself to do so. I needed to work it out. Moreover, I had to be. My fatigue was weaving illusions, yet no matter how fiercely I attempted to brush it aside, it remained undeniable. The whisper lingered, intensifying with each passing moment, and I realized it wasn't emanating from the radio or the breeze. It was originating from within the car itself. It's intriguing how swiftly a familiar place can shift from comfort to discomfort, even when it has been your home for a lifetime. That was the moment. The initial observation that struck me when peculiar events began unfolding on my farm was the swift transformation of comfort into unease. I've toiled on these lands for nearly my entire life. I believed I knew every inch like the back of my hand, or so I presumed. A few months back, it dawned on me that I might not be the only one present in this space. I vividly recall the very first time it occurred. It was as I strolled back to the house on those idyllic late summer nights, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink melting into deep blue. I had just completed my rounds, ensuring the animals were settled and everything was secure for the night. Suddenly, something in the cornfield caught my eye. Initially, I dismissed it as a mere trick of the light. Those elongated shadows can deceive after a long day. However, upon closer inspection, I realized it was more than just a shadow. In the center of the field lay an unusual pattern in the corn, a perfect circle. The plants were bent low, crushed, while the surrounding corn stood tall and unscathed, as if untouched by whatever had occurred at that singular point. It was clear that something extraordinary was happening there. I felt an urge to press down from above. As I drew nearer, my heart raced inexplicably. As I approached the boundary of the field, I came to a halt. An unsettling feeling washed over me. The air hung heavy, an eerie stillness enveloping the surroundings. Not a single cricket chirped, nor did the wind rustle through the leaves. Only a profound silence reigned. I lingered for a while, captivated by the circle, attempting to unravel its mystery. It was unlike anything I had ever encountered. I ultimately concluded that it was simply a natural occurrence. Perhaps the wind had shifted in an unusual manner. I wasn't fully persuaded by that reasoning, yet it felt preferable to the unsettling thought that something or someone had been present the following morning. The image of the circle lingered in my mind, compelling me to return to the field in daylight, seeking any clue to shed light on the mystery. However, upon my arrival, the circle had vanished. The corn stood perfectly upright, as if nothing had ever occurred. It felt as though the very earth had undergone a miraculous transformation, rejuvenated in the blink of an eye. The initial warning had arrived. The first moment I sensed a presence observing me, something lingering just beyond my vision. I attempted to brush it off. On a farm, the workload is relentless, leaving little room for distractions. Yet, that unsettling feeling lingered, intensifying as the weeks passed. One evening, a few weeks after the initial circle emerged, I found myself on the porch, savoring a cup of coffee, attempting to unwind after a long day. It was on yet another tranquil night. The distant melodies of crickets and frogs serenaded the stillness, while the full moon cast its gentle glow over the fields. Everything appeared serene, until a sound broke the silence. A soft rustling emerged from the cornfield, initially just a gentle whisper among the plants. But soon, it grew louder, as if something was navigating through the stems, parting them as it advanced. My heart raced with intensity. Listening to the wind or the rustle of an animal among the crops creates a unique atmosphere. This was unlike anything else. It was deliberate, akin to the sound of heavy footsteps. I rose from my seat, leaving my coffee perched on the porch rail, and took a few steps into the field. The sound faded away. The moment I relocated, an overwhelming silence enveloped me, almost stifling in its intensity. I found myself gazing through the endless rows of corn, a shiver running down my spine. "Hello," I made the call, my voice quivering just slightly. Absolutely nothing. I paused for a moment, yet silence lingered in response. After a minute of standing there feeling foolish, I shook my head and turned back toward the house. Just as I reached the door, the sound erupted again, louder and nearer. That truly sent a chill down my spine. I hurried inside, listening intently to the sounds outside, yet I hesitated to glance out the window in the morning. All was calm once more. In that instant, I sensed a shift. I was no longer solitary on this farm. In the weeks that followed, the situation grew increasingly bizarre. Every few days, yet another of those circles manifested in the cornfield, always flawlessly crafted, far too perfect to be a product of nature. Not a single stalk remained. All the stalks stood intact, with only the plants gracefully bending in a neat spiral. Sometimes, the circles would emerge at the field's edge. Other times, they would be deeper inland, only revealing themselves when I ventured out to work. Wherever they showed up, they consistently evoked a sense of unease in me, and it wasn't solely due to the circles. My pets started acting oddly. The usually serene dogs barked at thin air, gazing into the distance as if they were perceiving something beyond my sight. The cows dashed frantically across the pasture, their fear palpable, as if an unseen force was driving them to flee. Even the birds steered clear, soaring through the skies as I stood over the cornfield. I reassured myself that it was merely a figment of my imagination. What other explanation could there be? Yet, the more I attempted to dismiss it, the more insistent it became. Each night, the unsettling sound of movement through the corn returned, and with every passing evening, my resolve weakened. I found myself compelled to uncover the truth of what lurked beyond the rows. I grabbed my flashlight, laced up my boots, and stepped into the field. The moon hung high, casting elongated shadows across the ground as I approached the edge of the maze. Adrenaline surged through me with each step I took into the field. The sounds of the night faded away. I flicked on the flashlight, sweeping it between the stalks. Nothing but corn stretched endlessly before me. My heart raced, palms slick against the flashlight as I gripped it tighter. Then, just at the edge of the beam, I caught a glimpse of movement. It wasn't a person nor an animal. It was a tall, thin shadow gliding between the rows of corn, as if it were floating just above the earth. I stood still, the flashlight quivering in my grip. As I held my breath, I watched him move. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely escaping my lips. Silence enveloped me, broken only by the shadow that approached with an eerie, unnatural grace. In an instant, it vanished into the darkness. I didn't hesitate. I turned and sprinted back to the house, my heart racing as I reached the porch and slammed the door shut. Sleep eluded me that night, the haunting image of that shadow etched in my mind. It was not of this world, not human, and I sensed it lurking, waiting for my return. Fishing had always been my refuge, a way to escape and lose myself in the tranquil embrace of nature. Yet now, even the water felt restless. The lake's stillness offers a sense of comfort, with the gentle sway of the boat being the sole sound of water lapping softly against the hull. The structure on that day, however, something felt different. It wasn't merely the stillness. It was the weight of the air, thick and dense, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. I had visited that lake countless times before, a hidden gem from my childhood, nestled deep within the forest. Few ventured here, opting instead for larger lakes brimming with fish and free of weeds. But I cherished the solitude, just me, the water, and the vast canopy of trees. That morning unfolded like any other. I readied my gear, loaded it into my trusty old rowboat, and pushed away from the shore. The lake lay calm, its surface smooth as glass, mirroring the morning sky, while the fog lingered, yet to fully lift. The trees across the lake appeared as mere shadows in the distance, creating an atmosphere that was simply perfect. I paddled to my favorite spot at the heart of the lake, where the depths promised adventure, and I cast my line. For a time, the water remained still and silent. Fishing is more than just the act of catching. It's about the stillness, the quiet moments, and the thrill of anticipation. I reclined in the boat, allowing the tranquility to wash over me, when suddenly, an unusual occurrence took place. A tug on the line caught my attention. Initially, it was gentle, like a fleeting touch against the hook, but soon it intensified, becoming undeniably powerful. With my hands gripping the rod firmly, anticipation surged through me as I imagined the possibility of reeling in a massive fish. Suddenly, the rod bent sharply, compelling me to rise to my feet. As I reached for the settle, an unsettling sensation washed over me. The weight of my catch was unmistakable. The resistance was far from what you'd expect from a fish trying to break free. It felt more like reeling in a lifeless weight from the depths of the lake. I attempted to roll the settle with deliberate slowness, my heart racing with anticipation. Curiosity drove me to discover what lay beyond. Perhaps I had hooked the catch of a lifetime. Yet, with each tug, the cedar took on an odd sensation, gradually rising through the water as if it were extracting something monumental. And then, I caught a glimpse of it. Initially, it appeared to be an ancient fishing net, ensnared and weathered, cloaked in mud and seaweed. I felt a twinge of disappointment mixed with curiosity. Occasionally, Folks abandoned their equipment in the lake, and stumbling upon a relic of discarded trash was not unusual. But as I kept pulling, I spotted something unusual. The net was far from empty. Ensnared in the web of threads were pieces of metal, rusty yet familiar. I furrowed my brow, pulling the net nearer to the boat for a closer inspection. Amidst the metal fragments lay tattered remnants of fabric, decayed and fragile, whispering tales of their former glory. It felt like I had unearthed the remnants of something long forgotten, resting at the lake's depths for ages. A chill coursed through me as I worked to free the net from its knots. From the moment I encountered it, I was struck by an unsettling curiosity. The idea that it had been lurking beneath the water all along sent a shiver down my spine. I let the net slip back into the lake and reclined, my gaze fixed on the spot where it had vanished beneath the shimmering surface. The lake lay in tranquil silence, its surface smooth and untouched. The ambience was unmistakably altered. Now more substantial and frigid, I dismissed the sensation. I convinced myself it was merely a figment of my imagination, likely just an old piece of boat debris or some forgotten trash, nothing to be concerned about. With renewed determination, I cast the rod once more, eager to savor the remainder of the morning. Yet, an unsettling feeling lingered, refusing to fade for the next hour. A sense of unease washed over me. The water, usually calm and welcoming, now appeared darker and more profound, as if it held secrets I was trying to conceal. With each gentle sway of the boat, I discovered myself gazing off to the side, yearning to catch a glimpse of something that might be watching me in return. Just as I was about to lift my line for the final time, the settle suddenly strained, yanking with an alarming intensity. With a firm grip on the rod, I leaned back, focusing intently on maintaining my balance. Whatever had taken the bait, I felt an undeniable strength, more powerful than any fish I had ever reeled in before. My heart raced as I started to seize the moment, sprinting forward with endless possibilities ahead. Perhaps it was a colossal fish, lurking in the abyss, an enigma that had eluded human eyes until now. As I tugged, that familiar deadweight feeling surged back, the thirst resurfaced, slicing through the water's surface, and I sensed the heavy mass at the other end dragging me along with it. It wasn't a debate, it was simply an anchor, pulling me under. I rose to my feet, summoning every ounce of strength to pull it into the light. The vessel rocked with intensity, the water swirling in a chaotic dance around me. I clenched my jaw, resolute in my quest to uncover the truth. And then, with a sudden pull, the line loosened. I fell backwards, almost tripping inside the boat. As the tension disappeared, my breath was a mess of irregular gasps, my heart pounding against my chest for a moment. I just stood there staring at the line, trying to process what had just happened. Then I looked down at the water. Bubbles were rising from the spot where the line had been released, a steady stream of bubbles breaking the surface of the water. At first they were small, barely noticeable, but then they grew bigger, more violent, churning the water around me. My stomach shrank with a sense of fear. Pure something. It was down there, something huge, and it was rising to the surface. I backed away in the boat, my eyes fixed on the bubbling water. The boat was shaking under my feet, the waves swirling around it as if something were surrounding it from below, and then, without warning, the bubbles stopped. The lake was silent again, the surface smooth and calm, but the fear was still there, stronger than ever. My heart raced in my ears as I waited, anticipating something to break the surface, yet nothing came forth, leaving me with trembling hands. I seized the oars, determined to make my escape. I kept my focus forward as I rowed, every muscle in my body urging me to escape as quickly as I could. The boat glided through the water at a sluggish pace, each creak of the wood sending jolts of unease through me. Every wave stirred my imagination, conjuring images of something massive lurking just beneath the surface. As I reached the shore, I fell to the ground, my body shaking uncontrollably. As I gazed into the depths of the lake, I sought answers, yet the shadowy waters and elusive murmurs followed me back, ensuring I had no desire to return. The lake, with its tranquil surface and mysterious depths, is truly one of those wonders that are best left untouched. Have you ever found yourself driving late into the night? It's a peculiar sensation when it feels like the entire world is in slumber while you remain wide awake. The road unfurls endlessly before you, accompanied only by the gentle hum of the engine and the rhythmic lines of the asphalt. That was my reality one night, adrift in the middle of nowhere on a road trip that had stretched far beyond my expectations. I hadn't planned to be driving so late, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. My phone had lost signal, leaving the GPS useless for miles, and the fuel gauge was perilously close to empty. Then, in the distance, I spotted a flickering sign. A motel. An old roadside establishment with twinkling neon lights and a nearly vacant gravel parking lot. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a beacon of hope. It may not have been cozy, but it provided a space for rest. That was all I truly required. I paused before the motel office, where a light flickered inside and an open sign dangled in the window. The place had an odd quality, as if it had existed for eternity, yet somehow felt out of sync with any era. Yet, exhaustion overwhelmed me, and all I craved was the comfort of a bed. I swung the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of stale tobacco. Dark wood paneling adorned the walls, and an antique clock ticked away, though it marked the wrong time behind the counter. An elderly gentleman sat hunched over a newspaper, completely absorbed in its pages, not even glancing up. I stepped inside and greeted, "Hello," while clearing my throat. Absolutely nothing. I approached, needing a room for the night. The old man finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were pale and dull, as if he hadn't seen daylight in ages. He watched me silently, the moment stretching uncomfortably. "Sure he wants to stay here," he murmured. I frowned, puzzled. Why wouldn't he want to? He shrugged slowly. "We don't have many guests." "Well, I'll be one," I replied, attempting to sound casual. The old man sighed, retrieved a key from the drawer, and slid it across the counter with slow, deliberate movements. "Room 6, he muttered. "Pay in the morning." I didn't take the time to thank him. I snatched the key and hurried out. The motel hallway was eerily silent, the flickering lights casting elongated shadows on the floor. I located room 6 and pushed the door open. Inside was just as run down as I had anticipated. Worn furniture, a vintage TV, and a bed that had seen better days. Yet, it was clean, and that sufficed. I dropped my bag onto a chair and sank into it. The bed settled in with a gentle sigh. That was my initial impression. Something felt off in the room. The silence was unervingly complete. Gone was the usual hum of electrical wires, the chatter of fellow guests in nearby rooms, or even the faint echo of traffic outside. Just an unsettling void of nothingness. I shut my eyes, convincing myself it was merely my imagination at work. Just as I began to unwind, there it was. Knock, knock, knock. I jolted upright. Someone was at the door. I remained frozen, the sharp knock reverberating through the silence. I paused, contemplating whether it was the manager or perhaps a forgotten message. Taking a deep breath, I approached the door, pressing my ear against the wood. An inexplicable instinct urged me not to open it, sending a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, stepping back cautiously. Then, give it a good, solid knock, harder this time. This time, I took deep, heavy breaths. "Greetings," I inquired with a strained tone. Absolutely nothing. Just quietude. I peered through the peephole. No one was present. A sudden wave of irrational fear gripped my chest. I opened the door. I kept my thoughts to myself. I simply waited. The knock never came again, leaving only an echo of silence behind. It felt even more unsettling, as if something lurked on the other side, waiting and watching. I gradually retreated to the bed and settled down. My phone lagged with no Wi-Fi in sight. Panic surged within me, urging me to escape, but a voice held me back, warning against the temptation to open the door. At last, Exhaustion took its toll, and I made my way to bed. With the lights still on and a lingering fear in my chest, I finally drifted off to sleep. When I awoke, the sun was streaming through the curtains, and the terror of the previous night felt distant, almost as if it were a figment of my imagination. I quickly got up, gathered my belongings, and exited the room. The hallway remained as quiet and empty as it had been the night before. Upon reaching the reception, I placed the key on the counter, but the old man was absent. There was no one around, not a sound to be heard. A chill ran down my spine as I hurriedly left the motel, driven by an urgent need to escape. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and drove away without a glance back. After several miles, I finally stopped at a gas station. Feeling restless after making the payment, I decided to ask out of sheer curiosity. "Hey, have you heard about that motel down the road with the vintage neon lights?" The cashier's expression darkened. "The woman, that motel, the one roughly 20 miles back," I insisted. Last night, I found myself standing there as the man cast a peculiar gaze in my direction. "That location doesn't have a motel." My blood turned to ice. "That place has been closed for years," he remarked. "It was torn down following a mysterious disappearance that occurred there in the 80s. My mouth felt parched. "It simply can't be. I spent the night there." The cashier gave a slight shake of his head. "Hey there, I'm not sure where you spent the night, but that motel is no longer in operation. I never brought it up again. The motel was never on my radar again. Moreover, I never traveled that road again. Yet there's an unsettling thought that lingers. What if that motel never existed? What if it was never meant to be there? Where did I rest my head last night? And who was it that knocked on my door?" Have you ever navigated through a tunnel and experienced that fleeting chill, as if the outside world had vanished completely? In that fleeting instant, it seemed as though the entire outside world had disappeared without a trace. The sound of your tires against the pavement and the flickering lights overhead create an unsettling atmosphere. It's remarkable how a mere stretch of road transforms when enveloped by rock and shadow. That's where my journey began. It was merely a nighttime journey along a familiar highway, an aged tunnel that held no particular charm. The type of path you dive right in without a second thought, until something hits you and brings clarity. I chose to embark on a scenic journey through the mountains. It was one of those trips where the miles seemed to vanish, the road unfolding endlessly ahead, windows down, music low, ideal for clearing your mind, when I spotted the tunnel entrance. Night had fallen. The sun had set long ago, casting a deep darkness across the sky. Amidst the profound darkness, pierced only by the moonlight and the glow of my headlights, the tunnel emerged like a void in the rock, bordered by aged concrete and corroded signs. Having traversed that path earlier in the day, the night cast a different spell. An emptiness enveloped it, like a cave that consumed the road and the world beyond. Upon my entrance, the radio abruptly ceased its function. Only the sound lingered on. The steady thrum of tires against the pavement broke the stillness, enhancing the haunting quiet that surrounded it. The tunnel's walls bore the marks of time, caked in layers of grime. The aging lights flickered ominously, hinting at a potential blackout at any moment. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, reassuring myself that this was merely the usual unease of navigating through tunnels. No need for concern, but a few hundred yards in, I spotted something unusual, a figure standing at the tunnel's end. Initially, I assumed it was just an optical illusion. As your weary mind dances with distant shadows, the tunnel stretches endlessly, with the exit merely a faint glimmer of light ahead. Yet, in the middle of the road stands a figure, unmoving and unresponsive to the beams of my headlights, causing my foot to waver above the brake. What could possibly draw someone into the depths of a tunnel at such an hour? A figure approached steadily. It remained still. It neither advanced nor retreated. It simply lingered, poised and patient. I attempted to persuade myself that it was merely a figment of my imagination, that as I approached, I would discover it was just a pole or an unusual shadow. But then, a sound, A thud from above interrupted my thoughts. Something had struck the roof of my car. I recoiled. Another resounding strike echoed through the air. My breath quickened, as if something were prowling on the roof above. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Empty space stared back. Only shadows linger. The impact, a wave of panic surged through my mind as I spotted the figure on the road, accompanied by a relentless sound above the car, echoing as if it were trying to break in. I found myself unable to move. Stepping outside to discover what it was simply wasn't an option for me. In that moment, I made the only choice possible. I pressed down on the accelerator, and the engine surged to life, the sound of impact intensifying as if something clung to the metal. As I barreled toward the figure ahead, it suddenly vanished, not walking or running, but melting into the shadows of the tunnel wall, as if it had never existed at all. I burst through the tunnel exit at full speed, the road awakening with the rush of wind and the glow of moonlight, and just like that, the banging ceased. The car went silent again, as if nothing had happened. As if everything had been an illusion, I drove non-stop for miles. I looked at the rearview mirror every few seconds, hoping to see something following me, but there was nothing, just the empty road. Finally, when I found a gas station, I stopped. My body trembled. I got out of the car, feeling the cold air against my skin as it circled the vehicle. I forced myself to look at the roof, and there were little circular indentations in the paint, as if something had been repeatedly hitting the metal. My stomach churned. I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way home without looking back. I never took that road again. In fact, I avoid tunnels as much as I can since that night. Something in that thing I saw on the road, the sound in the ceiling, the way the air, it felt so thick in there. I know it wasn't a coincidence, it wasn't my imagination. Something was waiting for me in that tunnel, and the worst part is that I still wonder what would have happened if I had stopped, if I had gotten out of the car, if I had looked up. Tunnels are made to make a safe passage through the darkness, to enter on one side and exit on the other. But some tunnels have more waiting in the middle, and if you're lucky you can get out. You know that feeling you get when you take a wrong road, that little turn in your stomach when the road stops looking familiar and suddenly you realize you're in a place you've never been. I had that feeling all the time while driving down that road. Nothing was late, I was tired, and the GPS had lost signal like this for miles, but the path had seemed like a shortcut, at least so I thought, as I turned down it. It was one of those narrow, winding roads that cut through the middle of nowhere. No streetlights, no traffic, just an endless stretch of cracked pavement that glided through dense forest. The trees were so thick on either side that their branches intertwined above, blocking what little moonlight there was. The only illumination came from of my headlights, casting long shadows that flashed and danced as I went. I glanced at my phone, hoping to see some hint of life, maybe a signal bar or a small sign that the GPS was working again. But the screen was dark and the battery was draining quickly. I was starting to wonder if I should turn around when my headlights illuminated something ahead. There on the side of the road there was an old, beat-up car, seemed to have been there for a long time, rusty, with broken windows and doors wide open. I slowed down as I approached, scanning the area for signs of anyone nearby, but there was no one, just the abandoned car, as if like a forgotten memory. I should have kept driving. I should have ignored the urge to stop, but something forced me to brake. I parked next to the on the way. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment watching the car. The air was heavy with the buzz of insects in the trees, but underneath that was a strange, oppressive silence, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. I rolled down the window expecting to hear something, anything, but there was nothing. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and got out of the car. The air was colder than I expected, a sticky cold of the kind that clings to your skin even on a summer night. I shivered as I walked to the abandoned car. My footsteps crunched on the gravel of the road up close. The car looked even worse, the paint peeling, the tires flat, sunk into the dirt, as if it had been there for years. The interior was a mess, paper, years scattered through, an old jacket lying in the back, and something on the passenger seat that I couldn't make out. I raised the flashlight, and the light shone on the object, a doll just sitting there leaning against the seat, her glass eyes staring straight ahead, matted hair, torn dress. But it was the eyes that made me uneasy, big, unblinking, waiting. I took a step back, feeling a not form in my. There was no reason for anyone to leave a doll like that in an abandoned car, none at all. I turned to my car, ready to leave, and then I heard it, a soft but close crack. I froze. The sound was coming from the trees just behind the car, the sound of something or someone moving through the bushes. I held my breath trying to locate the exact direction. But the sound stopped as suddenly as I started. I picked up the flashlight and directed it towards the trees. Its ace cutting through the darkness. The shadows seemed to move in the flickering light, but I didn't see anything. Still, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I was being paranoid. The car was creepy, yes, but that meant nothing. It was probably just an animal in the woods, a deer, a raccoon, nothing to worry about. I forced myself to move I went back to my car, but when I reached out to open the door, something made me stop. The reflection in the rearview mirror, a movement, a tall silhouette, thin. Standing at the edge of the forest, just past the abandoned car, my heart skipped a beat. I turned suddenly, shining the flashlight at the figure. Nothing. The trees were motionless. The road empty, but I knew what I had seen. Someone had been there. Someone I had been watching myself. We were shaking as I got back into the car. Securing the doors with a hasty click, I struggled to get the key into the ignition, my breath ragged. The engine roared to life, my headlights, and lit up the road, the ace of light, cutting through the darkness. I took a look at the rearview mirror, nothing. I stepped on the accelerator. The car shook as I shot down the road, the noise of loose gravel crunching under the tires. The road twisted and turned, the trees closing on either side. I kept looking at the mirrors, hoping to see something move in the distance, but the figure didn't reappear. At least not immediately. I drove for several minutes, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that it had all been but then I noticed something strange. The road, this road I'd never been on before, it was starting to look familiar. The same cracked pavement, the same branches leaning over the road, the same sharp bends. I frowned, my white knuckles on the steering wheel. I couldn't have been driving in circles, it was impossible, but the feeling of déjà vu was undeniable. And then, in front of me, my headlights lit up something on the side of the road. The abandoned car. My foot hit the brake. The car skidded to a stop. My heart hammers in my chest as I watched the scene in front of me. The same rusty car, the same broken windows, the same doors wide open. I had just left this place. There was no way I would have come back here. A cold sweat ran down my back. Maybe I had become disoriented. Maybe the road was spinning. But deep down I knew that wasn't it. The air inside the car was heavy, suffocating. My mind was running, trying to decide what to do. But before I could react, the crack came back louder, closer. I looked at the rearview mirror, and there was the figure standing in the middle of the road right behind my car. Silent, watching, waiting. There's something in the mountains that makes you feel like you've entered another world. The air, it's thinner, sharper, and the silence is deeper, broken just by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of an animal. I've always liked that feeling, that of being completely removed from the chaos of everyday life. But I never expected that feeling of isolation to turn into something much more unsettling. It all started on a road trip with my friend Emily. We had been planning an end of a week in the mountains, just the two of us, some hiking, a cozy cabin, and lots of fresh air. Everything was going perfectly until we decided to take a shortcut on the way to La Cabana. The GPS showed us a shorter route, a narrow and winding mountain road that promised to reduce our travel time by almost an hour. At first it seemed like a good idea. The road was quiet with hardly any other cars, and the scenery was beautiful, trees towering high above us, their leaves beginning to turn gold and orange with the change of seasons. The air was crisp, the sky a perfect blue, and the journey was pacific. As we traveled down the road, the music playing softly in the background, the GPS signal began to flicker before disappearing entirely, leaving us to navigate on our own. I looked at Emily, feeling a little uncomfortable. "We're sure this is the right way?" I asked, trying to sound calmer than I felt. Emily looked at her phone and frowned at the blank screen. "Well, now it's the only way. Let's go on. The cabin can't be far away." I nodded, but there was something on the road that didn't feel right. It wasn't just the isolation or the fact that the GPS had stopped working. There was something else. Something I couldn't identify. How much the more I drove, the quieter everything became. There were no birds or wind, just the constant hum of the engine and the crunch of the gravel under the tires. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a silhouette in the distance, standing at the edge of the road, partially hidden by the trees, blinking, trying to make sense of it. It was tall, much taller than a person, with long limbs and unnatural stillness. My first thought was that it was some kind of animal, maybe a deer or a moose, but something about the way it stood there, so motionless, froze my blood. "You saw that?" I asked in a whisper. Emily looked up from her phone. "See what? Up there," I said, pointing to the figure. But when I looked again, it was gone. The road was empty. Emily narrowed her eyes, leaning forward in her seat. I don't see anything. I shook my head, trying to downplay the importance. Maybe it had just been a shadow or a tree. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been something else. Something that was watching us. We kept driving the road, twisting and turning as I climbed higher into the mountains. The trees became thicker. Their branches hung low over the road, and the light began to fade, even though it was still late for the day. In the afternoon, the sun barely filtered through the canopy, casting everything in a golden light and an unsettling atmosphere. Then I saw it again, this time closer. A tall figure standing right at the edge of the road, half hidden behind the trees. My heart skipped a beat as I slammed on the brakes, my eyes locked on it. It wasn't an animal. I had no idea what it was, but it was watching us. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, more to myself than to Emily. She followed my gaze, but by the time she looked, the figure had already slipped back into the trees, vanishing into the shadows. "You're teasing me," Emily said lightly, though a hint of nervousness crept in. I hesitated, my voice trembling as I replied, "I swear there's something out there. Something's looking at us." Emily held my gaze for a long moment. A moment later, he glanced out the window again, his expression taut. "Just let's get to the cabin. We'll feel better once we're off this road." I nodded, but the unease in my stomach intensified, a pressure building on the accelerator, trying to shake me off. It felt as if we weren't alone. The road stretched endlessly, each curve revealing more of the same dense trees and winding gravel. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my eyes darting between the road and the trees, anticipating the figure's return. Then, just as we approached a particularly sharp bend, there it was, right in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the loose gravel. While we were stopped in dry, Emily gasped, putting a hand to her mouth at the sight of him. He was also at least 2 m tall. His limbs were long and thin, his skin of a pale gray and sickly. His head was too small for his body, and his eyes were big, dark and empty, staring at us with an intensity that made me feel an icy cold in my blood. We froze watching him as he stood on the road, motionless. He didn't make a sound. He didn't move towards us, but I could feel his heavy, oppressive gaze as if he was waiting for something. "What the hell is that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I replied with a trembling voice, "but we have to get out of here." I put the car in reverse, my heart pounding as I started to back up, but the thing didn't move. It just stood there looking at us. The road behind us was narrow, and I struggled to keep the car steady as I backed up, my eyes jumping between the rearview mirror and the thing in front of us, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it gave an step to the side and disappeared into the trees. I didn't wait to see if I would come back. I started the car and sped down the road, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the crunch of the gravel under the tires. My heart was still pounding, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just seen. "What the hell it was that?" Emily asked again, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said with a dry throat. "I don't know." We drove in silence for a while, the light fading still more as the sun went down behind the mountains. The trees seemed to close in around us, their shadows long and twisted, crossing the road from time to time. I thought I saw something moving through the trees, a flash of movement, barely visible, but every time I looked closer, there was nothing. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the road widened and we saw a sign pointing to the cabin. I let out a sigh that I hadn't even realized I was holding back as I turned into the gravel driveway that led to the cabin. It was small, surrounded by trees, but it looked warm and cozy compared to the darkness of the forest. I parked the car and I turned off the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening. We sat there for a moment, neither of us wanting to leave. "You think he's gone?" Emily asked in a whisper. "I don't know," she replied honestly, "but we're here now. We should go in." We grabbed our bags and hurried to the cabin, locking the door behind us. The interior was cozy with a small fireplace and some windows that looked out onto the forest, but the feeling of relief that I hoped for didn't come. I couldn't shake the feeling that what we had seen on the road was still there watching us. We spent the rest of the night in silence, barely talking, too tense to relax. Every creak of the cabin, gust of wind outside made my heart beat faster that night. When I lay down in bed, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure we had seen and the way he had stood in the middle of the road or watching us, and then, just as I was finally starting to fall asleep, I heard him a soft creak outside the window. I froze, holding my breath. The sound grew louder, closer, as if something was moving through the trees, approaching the cabin. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding against my chest. Emily slept in the bed before me, entirely unaware of the commotion. I rose cautiously, striving to be as quiet as I could, and made my way to the window, my hands quaking with anticipation. As I gently drew back the curtain to peek outside, I spotted him. The silhouette lingered just beyond the forest's edge, his dark eyes locked onto the cabin, observing, anticipating. The mountains possess a stunning beauty and a serene quality, yet their sense of isolation imparts a unique feeling that sets them apart. You may feel isolated, but rest assured, you are never truly alone. There's always an unseen presence observing you, and occasionally, if fate isn't on your side, it may just slip away. In that moment, there's an unusual silence enveloping you, one that can only be experienced while submerged in water at night. It's not the serene calm you might anticipate. Rather, it's a weighty quiet that envelopes you, almost pressing down. It creates a sense of emptiness, a stillness that envelopes the world. In the stillness of that night, I encountered an unexpected sight, a boat that had no business being on the lake. It was a scene unlike any I had witnessed before. I had ventured out in my small fishing boat, seeking the solace that only this secluded spot in the woods could provide. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could momentarily escape the chaos of life. The lake lay tranquil, and I anchored myself at the center, surrounded by trees that stood like dark sentinels along the shore. Initially, I reclined, savoring the cool night air as stars shimmered on the water like tiny needles of light. Everything felt serene, even in the absence of fish. But it wasn't about the catch. It was the profound solitude of that silence that enveloped me. As the fog began to spread, it started as a light mist gently floating on the water's surface, something familiar. But soon, it transformed, enveloping the lake like a heavy blanket. It felt strange, almost otherworldly. The sky above was clear, devoid of clouds, yet the fog continued to advance, thickening with each passing moment. I leaned forward in the boat, squinting into the dense white haze, desperately trying to discern anything beyond the obscurity. It was as if the world had vanished, leaving me shrouded in darkness. A delicate sphere of clarity surrounded them, where the gentle lapping of water against the boat was the sole sound, muted as if the fog was consuming every echo. In that moment, I caught sight of it, a figure gradually materializing from the fog. Initially, it appeared merely as a shadow, a dark and distant form, scarcely discernible through the swirling mist. I thought it might be a trick of the light, maybe a reflection or some strange game of the fog, but as it got closer, the shape became clearer, more defined. It was a boat. Not a boat, a big old boat, and rising out of the fog like something from another time. I stood looking at it with my heart beating tightly. There shouldn't be anything of that size on the lake. It was a quiet place meant mostly for small boats and fishing. Not the kind of place where you would expect to see a ship like that. The wood looked old, the hull worn and eroded as if it had been sailing for decades, perhaps centuries. The ship moved slowly, cutting through the fog without making a sound. There was no engine or creak of wood, nothing but the soft undulation of the water as it approached. It was not coming directly towards me, but it was close enough to see every detail. The sails, the ropes hung loose. The way the water barely altered as it passed. There was something else, too. The deck was empty. I couldn't see a single person on board. There was no crew. There was no captain. Only a ghostly and chilling silence. The ship passed by me, as if I didn't even notice I was there. Endo disappeared in the fog as quickly as it had appeared. I stood there, frozen with the breath caught in my throat. What I had just seen, where it had come from. My mind was running, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a restored ancient ship, a historical replica or something. But that didn't explain why I was here on this remote lake in the middle of the night. I reached for my phone with my hands trembling, but there was no signal. Of course no. There was never reception that far away. I looked around trying to see if there was any trace from the boat, but the fog had swallowed it up completely. The lake was calm again, the surface calm, as if nothing had been there. I should have left. I should have started the engine and gone back to shore. But something kept me there. Curiosity, maybe. Oh, stupidity. I wasn't sure, but I found myself sitting again, watching the fog, waiting minutes, maybe more. The fog was still clinging to the thick water and motionless. I could barely see a few yards ahead of me, the shore completely hidden from view. The silence became heavier than before, and then I heard it. A soft, rustling distant like wood or under weak but unmistakable pressure came from the mist. My heart raced as I struggled to hear. The sound grew louder, closer, the unmistakable creak of a ship's hull moving through the water, but I couldn't see anything yet. The fog was too dense. The boat was still there. I knew it, and then, from somewhere in the mist, I heard something else, a faint voice. But Clara, help. It was just a whisper, but it gave me goosebumps. I got up, scanning the water, trying to see where it came from. Help! The voice sounded a little louder again this time, but still distant, echoing through from the fog. I grabbed the oars with my heart pounding hard and began to paddle in the direction of the sound. My boat cut through the water. The swirling fog was moving forward. I didn't know who was there or what was going on, but I couldn't ignore it. Someone needed help. But the more I rowed, the thicker the fog became. The voice became more subdued, harder to follow, until it was barely a whisper again. Help! I stopped with a breath amidst the sound had almost completely disappeared, swallowed up by the mist, leaving me alone in silence again. And it was then, when I saw the boat again. It rose out of the fog much closer, this time towering over my little boat. Now I could see the details, the splintered wood, the torn sails, the way it glided over the water without making a sound. My heart pounding as I looked at it, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. But there was something else, something I hadn't noticed. Before there were figures on the deck. I couldn't make out their faces, but they were there, shadows moving slowly across the deck, their unnatural movements almost too slow. They didn't seem to notice my presence. They didn't react at all. They just moved as if they were repeating a forgotten routine. But then suddenly they all stopped at once. They turned towards me slowly. I deliberately felt the blood run cold. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel his gaze on me, the weight of his attention. My hands clenched around the oars, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. One of the figures stepped forward, walked over to the edge of the boat, and raised a hand, pointing directly at me. This time it wasn't a plea for help. It was a warning. Go away. The word echoed through the fog, sending a shiver down my spine. I didn't wait for them to tell me twice. My hands closed tighter around the oars, but I was still paralyzed, unable to look away from the figure pointing at me. The fog swirled around the ship, enveloping it in a thick, ethereal layer. The boat began to move away slowly, sliding into the soundless fog. The figure on the deck kept his arm outstretched, his finger pointing directly at me, until slowly the mist devoured him completely. In that moment, my body responded instinctively. I seized the oars, the memory of trembling flooding back. The atmosphere was distinct, lighter, and more vibrant. I gazed at the lake, where the fog lingered over the thick, ethereal water, yet the ship had vanished. Not a single sign of it remained. The figures on the deck didn't even the slightest movement on the surface of the lake. I sat there for a long time staring at the water, trying to make sense of what I had been looking for, a rational explanation, but I hadn't known what I had seen. I knew I wasn't alone that night on the lake. I didn't return to the water. After that I sold the boat a few weeks later, and although I tried to convince myself to that it had all been an illusion, a shadow, a trick of the tired mind, I still hear that voice in my dreams, go whispering through the fog, warning never come back. There's something unsettling about being in the ocean at night. No matter how big the boat or how calm the waters are, the endless blackness around you can make you feel small, like you're the only thing left in the world. I've always loved water since I was a kid, but being on a cruise alone, surrounded by strangers, changes that feeling. What was once peaceful loneliness transforms into something more unsettling, more isolating. I booked this cruise at the last minute. Work had been hell. My relationships seemed to fall apart, and I needed to get away from everything. A week at sea with no emails, no phone calls, just me, the ocean open, and my thoughts sounded perfect. The first few days were exactly what I expected. I spent time lounging by the pool, reading, and occasionally making awkward little talk with other passengers, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to make friends, however. On the third night, something changed. Started when I noticed that some of the people I'd seen on the first day, people I was sure I'd talked to or spent by, were no longer there. It's normal for passengers to stay in their own spaces, especially on such a large cruise ship, but there were a few faces that were clearly remembered. A couple who had been sitting at my table on the first night at dinner, a group of friends who were always laughing at the bar, even a family with 2 kids running through the halls, laughing. They all disappeared at first. I didn't think too much about it. Maybe they were just spending more time in their cabins or in other areas of the ship, but as time went on I realized that I didn't see them anywhere, neither in the pool nor in the boat. On the 4th night, the dining room and deck seemed to fade into oblivion, as if they had never existed at all. Everything got worse. I was sitting on one of the upper decks, enjoying the night breeze with the gentle hum of the ship's engines in the background. The stars shone scattered in the sky like little flashes of light, and the ocean stretched out in all directions, dark and infinite. I could hear the murmur. It was a quiet night, but then I noticed it. At the end of the deck, near the railing, there was a man standing completely motionless, wearing a dark jacket and his head slightly tilted as if he were staring at something in the water. I didn't know why, but something about him made me uncomfortable. He wasn't leaning against the railing. He wasn't moving, not at all. He was just standing there like a statue. I watched him for a while. It's turn around or walk away. But he didn't. He stayed nailed to his place, watching the ocean after what seemed like an eternity. I finally stood up thinking about going back to my cabin. But when I walked next to him, something strange happened. The sounds of the ship, the laughter, the music, the conversations faded away. It was like if I'd crossed an invisible barrier. Suddenly all I could hear was the tossing of the waves against the hull. It wasn't just silence. It was absolute emptiness. I stopped, looking at the man. He hadn't moved, but now I could see that his hands were clenched into fists, their knuckles white under the dim light. A chill ran down my spine. "You're fine?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. He didn't answer. He didn't even react. It was as if he hadn't even heard me. I got a little closer, keeping some distance from that angle. I could see his face. He had no expression. His eyes were fixed on the horizon for a moment. I thought he wasn't even breathing. Before I could say anything else, an inexplicable cold ran through my body and an overwhelming urge to move away. I slowly backed away without taking my eyes off him until I was there enough away to turn and hurry up the stairs. The moment I set foot on the main deck, the sounds of the ship came back suddenly. The laughter, the music, all came back as if it had never gone away. I stopped for a second, looking around. No one seemed to have noticed anything strange. No one seemed to have seen the man on the upper deck that night in my cabin. I couldn't stop thinking about him, who he was, by what he stayed there without moving. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something disturbing. I hadn't seen him before, not at dinner, not in the pool, nowhere. It was as if he had just appeared out of nowhere. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw his empty, lifeless face looking out over the ocean. At some point I must have fallen asleep because I was awakened by a sound, a bang soft on my door. I stood completely still. At first I thought it was just the swaying of the boat making something move, but the tapping with continued was rhythmic, deliberate. My heart began to beat hard. I slowly got up and walked to the door, pressing my ear against it. Nothing. The tapping had stopped. I hesitated for a second before turning the lock and opening the door. The hallway was empty. There was no one there. But on the floor right in front of my door was a small piece of paper bended. My breathing became shallow as I bent down and picked it up, unfolded it with trembling fingers. Inside, written in a trembling handwriting, there was only one word: "Look." I stared at the note, feeling fear curl up in my chest. Look what? Who left this? My gaze swept down the empty hallway, but there was no sign of anyone. I swallowed hard and I locked the door, locking, keeping the note in my pocket. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the boat, every slight sound in the hallway, kept me alert, and every time I closed my eyes I saw the man on the upper deck, still watching the ocean. The next day I decided to look for answers. I went to the reception desk and asked for him, but when I described the man in the dark jacket, the receptionist just told me he looked confusedly. "We have no record of a passenger with that description," he said, shaking his head. My stomach sank. I tried to explain what I had seen, but the more he talked, the more ridiculous it sounded. That night, when the knocking on my door came back, I didn't open it. I just sat on my bed looking at the note I still had in my hands. "Look, I don't know what I wanted you to see, but I know you give, so I always sit observed. There is a particular loneliness that you feel when you are deep in the forest, miles away from anything or anyone familiar with it. It is a strange kind of isolation, almost pacific, until it is no longer, until you realize that the world is much bigger and darker than you imagined, and that if something goes wrong, there is no one around to help you. That was exactly what I felt when I went to the forest. Hiking that trail last summer, at first it was just a weekend trip, something to get away from the city for a few days. I felt restless, caught up in the routine of work and stress, and a solo hike seemed like the perfect solution. I chose a trail in a state park a few hours away, known for its rugged beauty and, most importantly, for its lack of crowds. Just what I needed. The car ride was uneventful. I arrived at the trailhead point with the sun already high in the sky. The weather was perfect. A clear blue sky, a light breeze, and that cool mountain air you don't feel in the city. I grabbed my backpack, adjusted the straps, and tied myself in the woods. The trail was beautiful. It made its way through dense trees and rocky outcroppings with occasional views of distant peaks. For the first few hours I didn't see anyone else, and that was exactly what I wanted. Just me. The path and the sound of my boots creaking on the gravel was pacific, the kind of solitude that feels good. But as the day progressed, I began to notice something strange. At first, it wasn't anything obvious, just small details. The trees seemed to grow closer together, the air felt more heavier, thicker, the trail itself began to become less defined, as if fewer people had walked it lately. And then there was the silence. Before, the forest had been full of sounds, birds singing, leaves rustling with the wind, branches rustling in the old, but now, nothing. The forest was completely dead. I pushed those thoughts aside. I told myself I was exaggerating. After all, I was in the middle of the forest. The silence was normal. I didn't check my map and decided to keep going. There was a small campsite about 8 kilometers ahead, and I planned to stay there overnight. The trail would form a loop that would take me back to the parking lot the next day. But as I walked, the feeling of unease grew. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. The trail felt different, like it wasn't the same one I had been hiking before. The trees seemed taller, darker, the undergrowth was thicker, more tangled. Every now and then I seemed to see something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving between the trees, a flash of light that disappeared before I could focus on it. And then I found the backpack. It was right on the side of the trail, half hidden among the ferns. At first I thought someone had left it behind by accident. Maybe a hiker I had gotten out of the way and forgot it. But when I got closer, I realized that the backpack was old, worn, the fabric was torn in places, and the zippers were rusty. It had a thick layer of dirt and leaves on it, as if it had been there for months, maybe even years. Curiosity won me over. I opened one of the pockets and took out a map of the park, wrinkled and yellowed by time. But it was what I found in a side pocket that really made my heart race. A journal. The cover was worn. The pages were yellowed. I started flipping through it, going through detailed notes about the trail, the wildlife, the scenery, until I got to the last entries, and something changed. The calligraphy became chaotic. The sentences were shorter, more desperate. Something is following me. I stopped in dry. I still hear footsteps behind me, but when I turn around, there's no one. I kept reading, feeling fear settle in my chest. I don't know how I got here. This isn't the same path. Changes. I tried to go back, but the road is blocked. There are no signs anymore. I don't know where I am. The last entry was just a sentence written in a shaky and uneven handwriting. It's looking at me. I closed the diary suddenly with my hands shaking. My first instinct was to drop everything and run. But when I looked up, my heart stopped. The trail was gone. The clear, defined path I had been following for hours, it was no longer in place. There were only thick, dark trees. The forest had closed in around me. I turned in all directions, looking for a somewhat familiar landmark, but all I saw were more trees, more weeds. There was no way out. My breathing became fast and choppy as I tried to calm down. I hadn't gotten lost. Not really. I just had to stay calm, remember my direction, and walk back. But then I heard it, a rustle in the leaves. A rustle behind. Someone or something was there of me. My muscles tensed. Maybe it was an animal, a deer, a bear, something normal. But the footsteps were too human, slow, deliberate. I couldn't see anything in the trees, but I felt his presence, and then I saw him. A figure standing in the trees. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew he was looking at me. Frozen in fear, I didn't move. I blinked and then disappeared. I didn't wait, but I grabbed my backpack and ran. I ran without thinking, without looking back, my feet stumbling over roots and stones. The steps followed me faster, closer. The forest closed in around me. The shadows lengthened. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs couldn't take it anymore, and then the path appeared again, like it suddenly, as if it had never disappeared. I staggered to it, panting, feeling my heart beat against me. I didn't stop. I kept walking until I reached the camp. I didn't sleep that night. The silence of the forest weighed on me. Every shadow seemed darker than it should be. At dawn I packed my things and left. I didn't look back. I don't know what I saw there. I don't know what happened to the person who wrote that diary. I just know that I will never go back to that path, because some routes don't lead where they should. Some lead to places you can't come back from. There's something about driving alone at night that's always a little unsettling. The road stretches endlessly in front of you, dark and empty, with only the faint glow of your headlights cutting through the blackness. I've done enough solo trips to know how to shake off that uncomfortable feeling, but that night was different. That night, no matter how much I kept telling myself that I was just imagining things, no, I could shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. I'd been driving for hours, returning home from a work trip that had taken longer than expected. It was late and I still had a few hours to go. The highway was almost deserted. Just me, the occasional passing car, and the constant hum of the engine had the radio on at low volume. More for company than anything else, but I wasn't doing much to calm my nerves. The night was laden with fog, the kind that makes everything outside the car feel distant and disconnected. The road was barely visible, swallowed up by the billowing fog, and the trees lining the highway seemed to get closer with each mile. I focused on the road, trying to ignore the growing sense of isolation that hung in the air. At that moment, my phone began to ring. The unexpected noise caught me off guard. I looked at the screen, anticipating a call from my wife or perhaps a work-related inquiry, but instead, I was met with an unfamiliar number. No caller ID, just an endless sequence of digits that felt utterly perplexing. For a brief moment, I paused before responding, wondering if it was a misdial or perhaps a telemarketer on the line. "Hi," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet of the car. A moment of silence stretched, leading me to believe the call had dropped, and then it came, a gentle, far-off voice barely above a whisper, requiring me to focus intently to grasp the words being spoken. "You're alone." I frowned, looking at the screen again. My heart skipped a beat. "Sorry." The voice didn't answer right away. It was a low, whispering woman's voice, as if speaking from far away, and there was a strange creak in the background like static or wind. "You're alone." He repeated his clearest voice. This time I felt a chill run down my spine. The way he said it, as if I already knew the answer, put me on alert. "Who is it?" I asked in a trembling voice. There was a pause, and then he said, "You should keep driving." Blinking, looking at the road ahead, my pulse speeding up. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" But the line was cut before I could get an answer. I stared at the phone in my hand. The screen showed the call was over. For a moment, I just sat there trying to process what had just happened. Maybe it was a joke. I said to myself, some joker dialing a random number just to annoy me, but it didn't feel like a joke. I threw the phone on the passenger seat, shaking my head and trying laugh at it. Just a random weird guy. I thought, nothing major. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself of it, the feeling of unease in my chest didn't go away. I kept driving, my hands holding on to the steering wheel tighter than before. The fog seemed to thicken, pressing around the car like a heavy blanket, and the road ahead seemed to fade into nothingness. The highway was completely empty now, not a single car in sight. The only sound was the constant hum of the engine and the soft rustle of tires on the pavement. And then my phone rang again. I jumped, my heart racing, and grabbed it from the seat. It was the same long number, unknown, no caller ID. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, my fingers shaking over the answer button. Everything in me was screaming not to answer, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know who it was. "Hello," I said, my voice just a whisper. The same soft crack sounded through the line, and then the woman's voice again. "Don't stop." Her tone was quiet, almost comforting, but there was a nuance in her voice that made me shudder. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Why are you calling me?" There was a long silence, and for a moment I thought the call had been cut off again, but then she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Is following you." My blood froze. "What is following me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The static on the line increased, crackling like distant thunder. Her voice now sounded distant, as if she were speaking from miles away. "Don't stop," she repeated, and then the call was cut off. I looked at the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands were shaking. My mind was filling with 100 unanswered questions. What the hell was going on? Who was that woman, and how did I know where she was? I looked at the empty road in front of me. The fog so thick now that I could barely see a few yards ahead. The trees seemed to close on either side, their dark shapes writhing in the fog, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow flickered in my side mirror. Just a flash, but enough to I struck a shock of fear. I turned my head hard, scanning the road behind me. But there was nothing there. Just the fog, swirl. I knew I'd seen something. Something dark, something moving right behind the car. I stepped on the gas, my heart pounding as the car moved forward. The engine roared as I rushed down the road, the trees passing by like a blur. My breath came out gasping. I grabbed hold on to the steering wheel, was so loud my knuckles were white. The phone rang again, but this time I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I could feel it now. Something behind me, something following me, something I couldn't see, but I knew it was there. The phone kept ringing over and over again, its high-pitched sound cutting through the roar of the engine. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't stop driving. The minutes stretched like hours. The empty road stretched out endlessly in front of me. Every shadow in the fog seemed to move. Every tree seemed to lean too close. My heart pounded, my mind a chaos of fear and confusion. I didn't know what was following me. I didn't know why. But I did know one thing. I couldn't stop myself. The phone rang again, but this time it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like an order. Keep driving. I stepped on the gas harder, my foot shaking, and the car sped forward, the speedometer going higher and higher. The world outside the car was a blur. The trees and the fog blended into a single dark and amorphous spot, and then, as suddenly as it had started, the fog began to dissipate. My breath caught in my throat as the fog swirled and faded little by little, revealing the clear night sky. The trees receded, the road opened up, and in the distance I saw the glow of bright and comforting lights, street lights, marking the boundary of a small town. The phone stopped ringing. I slowed down, my hands still shaking, and I stopped at the first gas station I saw. My heart was still pounding, my mind still trying to take in what had happened. I turned off the engine and sat for a long moment in the silence, listening to the soft tic-tac from the engine cooling down. I picked up my phone, looked at the screen. No missed calls, no unknown numbers, just silence. Sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones that haunt us the most. I don't know what was following me that night. I don't know who the woman on the phone was, but I do know one thing: whatever it was, keep it out there, and if you ever drive alone at night and your phone rings, you better keep driving. There's a kind of silence you only find deep in the forest at night. It's not the quiet silence of a peaceful afternoon. It's one that feels too still, too unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. That was the kind of silence I found myself sitting in around a campfire with a couple of friends in the middle of a national park miles away of any sign of civilization. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. We had been planning this camping trip for weeks, and it seemed like a good way to unplug. No phones, no work. Just us and nature. Walked all day, set up our camp near a creek, and settled in for the night, with the campfire crackling and the stars just peeking through the trees. Everything was perfect until we had stopped being it. It started with the lights at first. I didn't notice them. We were too caught up in the conversation, laughing and telling stories, enjoying the warmth of the fire, but then I saw them out of the corner of my eye. A faint glow moving through the trees. I turned my head, squinting in the darkness, trying to understand what I was seeing. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection of the fire, or even another camper in the distance with a flashlight, but the more I looked, the more I realized that those lights were not like any other that I had seen before. They were moving too fast, too smoothly, sliding through the trees in a way that didn't seem natural, and it wasn't just one. They were several small glowing spheres that floated and faded, appearing and disappearing as if they were playing some kind of game. I nudged Jake, who was sitting next to me. "Hey, you see?" That followed my gaze, his face furrowed in confusion. "The lights, yes. What do you think?" Sean shrugged. But I could tell he was as restless as I am. "I don't know. Probably other campers, flashlights. Maybe, but I knew it wasn't that. There were no camps nearby, no trails, sun, miles and miles of dense forest, and no flashlight moved that way. No flashlight had that glare. Pale and unsettling Emily, who was sitting in front of us, noticed our expressions and turned to look at her eyes. They got bigger. What the hell? None of us spoke for several minutes. We just watched the lights dance through the trees, moving strangely, always far enough away that we couldn't see what was causing them. Sometimes they flickered and disappeared. Other times they appeared in a completely different place. Maybe they're fireflies, Emily murmured. Although her tone wasn't very convincing, Jake shook his head. Fireflies don't glow like that. I was already standing away from the heat of the fire before I even realized that I had moved something and those lights was calling me. I'm going to take a look, I said. Jake grabbed my arm, his firm grip. Man, no, you don't know what's there. Vasile looking again. The lights were shining brighter now, as if they had noticed that we were looking at them, as if they were calling us. Emily also raised her pale face. In the light of the fire, I don't think let it be a good idea, but I was already moving towards the trees. My steps almost automatic. Something about them attracted me to the air. It felt colder as soon as I entered the tree line. The sound of the forest dimmed as if I had crossed to another place. I could still hear Jake and Emily behind me, their voices low and anxious, but my focus was on the lights. Now they were closer. They floated right past the first group of trees waiting for me. I took another step. The light flickered, intensified. They weren't moving randomly. They were guiding me. The farther I went, the more I noticed how the forest changed around me. The trees getting thicker, their branches gnarled and crooked, casting angular shadows on the ground. The air smelled of dampness and old earth, with a background of something stale, as if this place had been sealed for I don't know how long. I walked, but eventually the lights stopped moving. They stayed floating in the air, forming a small circle in front of me, and then I saw it. A small clearing in the middle of the forest was not big, maybe about 3 m wide, but it was incorrect. The ground was bare. No grass, no leaves, only exposed earth, and in the center of the clearing something was buried. At first it looked like a rock or an old log, but when I got closer, I saw that it was none of those things. It was an old wet object, covered with dirt and moss. The light flickered on its surface and revealed engraved marks, symbols I didn't recognize, carved deep into the material. My skin bristled. There was something about them that didn't make sense. They seemed to move if I looked at them too long. My instinct screamed to back off, that I shouldn't be here, that this wasn't I had to be found. Say, take a step back. The air changed, and then I heard something, a soft, faint whisper, like an echo lost in the wind. My heart was pounding in my chest. I stood motionless, trying to understand it, but the whisper was too low, too far away, as if I spoke a language I couldn't understand. The lights began to flicker rapidly. The air became heavier. The object on the ground shone. My body shone. Then something changed. A dull heartbeat echoed in my chest. It wasn't a sound, it was a sensation, as if the whole forest was breathing, as if something in this clearing had just woken up. I ran. I didn't look back, the lights flickering furiously. The earth seemed to shake beneath my feet. I ran through the trees, feeling the air close in around me, my lungs burning, my legs trembling, but I didn't stop when they finally broke in. Camp Jake and Emily were standing wide-eyed. What happened? Jake asked, his voice tense. I had no words, just a certainty in my chest. We have to go now. They didn't ask. We packed up in record time and left. I didn't look at the woods. I didn't look for the lights. I didn't want to see if something was watching us. I don't know what I found there. I don't know what the symbols meant, but I do know something. Something in that BZ that didn't want us to be there, and we'll never go back to find out why. There's something about old houses that makes you feel like you're stepping into someone else's memories. Wooden floors creak under your feet, the smell of dust and old books wafts in the air, and every corner seems to keep a secret. That's exactly what I felt when I checked into the little bed and breakfast in the outskirts of the village were quaint, even charming, with its antique furniture and faded wallpaper. But there was something about it that I couldn't quite pin down. Something that felt a little too quiet. I was traveling for work on a route a little further than usual, and I decided to stay the night so as not to make the journey in one go. The bed and breakfast had good reviews, and from the outside it was I looked cozy. A 2-story Victorian house with a porch surrounding it and meticulously trimmed hedges. The owner, an older woman named Mrs. Winthrop, greeted me with a warm smile and a set of antique bronze keys. She showed me my room on the 2nd floor. At the end of a narrow hallway of faded family portraits. This house has been in my family for generations, she said proudly as we walked. Each piece of furniture, each painting, everything is original. We like to keep things as they were. There was something in his voice that sounded almost rehearsed, as if he had given the same speech to hundreds of guests before me. I nodded politely, trying to ignore the strange feeling that had invaded me since I walked through the door. It was just an old house, I told myself. There was no reason to be restless. My room was cozy, a small and tidy space with a four-poster bed, a wooden chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the garden. Mrs. Winthrop explained the basic amenities to me, pointed to the shared bathroom at the end of the hallway, and left me alone to settle in. But as I arranged my things, I couldn't help but notice the door across the hall was closed, unlike the other doors in the house that showed signs of wear and tear over the years. This one was different. It looked new. The brass knob shone without a single stain, and the wood had no scratches or marks of curious use. I went over and looked at it more closely. It had no plaque, no number, no sign that it was another guest room. I reached out to the knob, hesitating for a moment before stopping a little on me. I knew not to open it from below. Mrs. Winthrop's voice interrupted my thoughts. "All right up there." I jumped and walked away from the door quickly. "Yes, all right," I replied, hurriedly returning to my room. I closed the door behind me, trying to push the door out of my mind. Mysterious. I convinced myself that it was probably just a storage closet or a room they no longer used. It wasn't worth worrying about. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't leave. It was old, creaky, and every sound seemed to be amplified in the darkness. But the silence that floated in the hallway was different. It was heavy, as if something was waiting. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed for hours, listening to every little sound. Finally, I decided that a walk around the house might help me clear my head. I got up carefully, avoiding making any noise as I went out into the hallway. The house was dark, with only a faint glow of the moon filtering through the lace curtains, and there was the door. I stopped in front of it. It didn't make sense, but I felt it calling me before I could stop. My hand was already on the knob. I turned slowly closed. For some reason I was relieved, but at the same time the curiosity only grew. Why would Mrs. Winthrop keep this room closed when all the others were open? I decided not to insist any longer. I went down to the living room where an old grandfather clock marked the time with a rhythmic sound. I sat down in one of the armchairs near the extinguished fireplace, trying to calm myself, and then I heard it, a soft noise coming from upstairs. At first I thought I had imagined it, but there it was again, a creaking as if someone was walking slowly through the hallway. The house was empty, except for Mrs. Winthrop and me. Her room was downstairs. The sound continued. A few light steps, and then the unmistakable sound of a door opening. My blood froze. I went upstairs with my heart beating in my throat. When I reached the hallway, I stopped in dry. The door closed, now ajar. I stood motionless, feeling a chill run down my spine. All in my body I told myself that I should not approach, but something stronger than fear pushed me forward. With a slow movement I pushed the door open. The room inside seemed to be completely normal. It was like any other in the house. A well-made bed, a chest of drawers, a window with lace curtains, nothing strange. But the air was colder here, and it smelled like something old, something forgotten. I took a step inside. On the bed there was a small leather book with trembling hands. I picked it up and opened it. It was a diary. The pages were yellowed with time, full of handwritten notes, but it was the last entry, the one that stopped me in dry. June 14th. I'll stay in the locked room tonight. I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong here. Mrs. Winthrop says the room has always been like this, but I don't believe her. I hear things at night, steps, whispers. I'm going to find out what's behind that door. If not, the entrance ended there. The rest of the page was blank. The rest of the page was blank. Fear crawled across my chest. What had happened to the person who wrote this? Why had I been left in this room? Why had Mrs. Winthrop lied? Then behind me I heard a sound, a soft creak. I turned quickly, but there was no one there, just the door open. I didn't wait to find out more. I dropped the diary and ran back to my room, locking the door. I passed the rest of the night. I wake up listening to every little sound of the waiting for something or someone to try open my door. Nothing happened. When dawn broke, I took my things and left without saying goodbye. I didn't want to ask Mrs. Winthrop about the diary. I didn't want to know what had happened to that guest. I just wanted to leave. There are places that keep secrets, places where the past clings to the walls like a shadow. That bed and breakfast, it was one of those places, and I'll never go back to find out what really happened in that locked room. There's something unsettling about the mountain roads, the hairpin bends, the cliffs that seem too close, the feeling that any mistake may be the last. Even when you know exactly where you're going, there's always a slight chill down the back of your neck. But that night, on that remote road that wasn't on the map, that chill turned to terror. Everything had started with a detour. The trip was simple, a weekend at a friend's cabin. I had planned everything in detail. I had left early. I had snacks, and I had downloaded several podcasts for the road. The first hours were quiet, the traffic light, the afternoon pleasant. But when I got to the base of the mountain I saw the sign, "Detour, road closed." Some orange barriers blocked the way, forcing me to turn onto a side road. No, I worried too much. It wasn't the first time a trip had taken an unexpected detour. I thought it would be a few more miles. I couldn't be more wrong. At first the road seemed normal, a little narrower perhaps, but paved and easy to navigate, however. The farther I went, the stranger. The whole road it got narrower and narrower to the point where my car could barely fit, the cracks in the car. The asphalt was deep, with weeds growing between them. The guardrails were rusty and bent as if someone or something had torn them off. The fog began to thicken, a white and dense blanket that drowned the headlights, making me barely able to see a few meters ahead. I looked at my GPS without a perfect signal. The silence was also strange. There was no wind, there were no insects, there was nothing. I pressed the steering wheel. Something inside me told me that I should not to go on. But there was no room to turn around. I had no choice but to continue. Then I saw the sign. It was old, barely legible, its paint faded and peeling. But the words were still clear. Dead end 3 miles. My stomach sank. How could an official detour lead to a dead end? I thought about backing up, but the road was so narrow that turning around was impossible, and driving in reverse for miles on a mountain shrouded in fog wasn't a choice either. I had no choice but to keep going. Maybe I'd find an intersection. Maybe the fog was getting thicker and thicker. It seemed to envelop the car, making me feel trapped in an endless tunnel. The trees on the sides of the road seemed crooked, their branches long and gnarled like skeletal hands. Then I saw her on the side of the road. An abandoned car was old, covered rust with broken windows and flat tires. It had been there for years. I slowly walked past it, trying not to look too much. But I couldn't help but notice the driver's door ajar, as if someone had run away. A chill ran down my spine. I kept driving faster. This time the miles seemed to get longer. The sign had said 3 miles to the end, but I had already driven at least twice as much, and the highway I just kept going, and I felt trapped like the mountain wouldn't let me go. And then I finally saw something in the distance, a clearing, the end of the road. But something was wrong. The road didn't end at an intersection, not even a small space to turn around. It ended up on a cliff. No barriers, no warnings, just a black void covered by fog. My skin stood on end. I slowed down and stopped. I stared at the abyss for a moment just before the edge. If I hadn't braked in time, there would be no exit. Then I saw a movement in the fog. Something was approaching. At first I thought it was another driver, someone else who had gotten lost. But the more I looked, the more I understood that he was not a human. The shape was tall, too tall. He moved slowly, as if sliding instead of walking. Fear paralyzed me. The air around me became dense, as if the mountain itself held its breath. The being stopped a few meters from my car. I couldn't see his face. I couldn't see his body. Just a shadow, shrouded in mist. But I knew he was looking at me. My heart was pounding. The cold sweat ran down my back. And then the shadow moved closer. I didn't think about it. I stepped on the accelerator. The car skidded when I turned into the narrow space, brushing the edge of the cliff for a moment. I felt like I was going to fall, but the wheels found traction, and the car darted back down the road. I drove like crazy, not caring about the curves or the fog. I just wanted to run away, every fiber of my being. I told myself that if I looked in the rearview mirror, I would see that something was coming behind me. I didn't do it. I didn't look. I just drove. No, I know how long it was. But suddenly the fog started to clear, the trees looked normal again, and without any explanation I was back on the highway. I didn't see the turnoff, I didn't see any sign for the road I had just been on. It was like it had never existed. I told the story to some friends. No one believed me. They must have missed me, that my mind played tricks in the fog. But I know what I saw. I know that road wasn't on any map, and I know something was there, waiting for someone like me to take the wrong detour. If you ever see a road that shouldn't be there, if you run into a road that feels too lonely, don't keep going, don't follow the fog, and for whatever you want, don't make it all the way to the end. There are places you pass hundreds sometimes, without thinking twice, places that blend into the background, unnoticed and irrelevant, until one day something changes, and suddenly everything in that place feels bad. That's what happened to me the night I stopped at the gas station on Route 22, the same one that had happened countless times, but where I had never stopped. I wish I hadn't. But my tank of gas was almost empty, and the next station was more than 50 miles away. It was late, almost midnight, and there wasn't a single car on the road. The asphalt stretched out infinitely in the darkness, only interrupted by the occasional flickering streetlight. When I saw the gas station sign flashing in the distance, I felt relief. I had no choice. I had to stop. The place was a small mess, neglected as if there was no. It's been renovated since the 70s. The gas pumps were old, with the paint peeling into long strips. The building seemed to have seen better days. But the lights were on and the sign on the window said open 24 hours. I parked next to one of the pumps and got out of the car. The night air was too still. Not a single sound. Not crickets, no wind, nothing. I shook the uncomfortable feeling and swiped my card through the bomb reader. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. I sighed and headed to the store to pay. Inside. When I pushed the door open, a rusty doorbell rang above my head. The air inside smelled of dust and stale tobacco. The shelves were full of bags of snacks, old sodas, brands I didn't recognize, and newspapers, yellowed with time under the flickering light of a fluorescent tube. A man was behind the counter hunched over a magazine. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Hello, I said, trying to get his attention. Bomb 2 is not accepting card. Anything. I frowned and walked over to the counter. Hello. Finally the man looked up. His eyes were weird, too wide, but at the same time empty. Bomb 2, he repeated in a monotone voice. Yes, it doesn't work. I can pay in cash. Nodded slowly and held out a hand. The skin was too pale, almost grayish, and his nails were long, yellowish at the edges. Something about him wasn't right. I couldn't explain what, but he didn't feel human. I quickly reached into my pocket and left a 30 bill on the counter. He took it with slow movements, as if every action was an effort. When he handed me the receipt, I noticed that his hands were cold, too cold. I walked away quickly. Thank you. Mumble something. Don't look back. I stopped in dry. I slowly turned to him. What did you say? But he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was just looking at his magazine as if he had never spoken. Chill. He ran down my spine without saying anything else. I left the store and headed for my car while I filled up the tank. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air felt heavier, as if the night had suddenly changed. Then I heard a noise, a whisper, a creak. It came from the woods behind the gas station, a rhythmic sound as if something was moving between the trees. I stood still with the hose still in my hand, trying to hear better. The sound got louder, closer. It was breathing. My whole body froze. My eyes searched in the darkness, but there was nothing visible, just the deep black of the trees and that breath. Waiting for the pump clicked, pointing to the tank being full. With trembling fingers, I put the hose back in place and closed the fuel cap. My instinct screamed, "Run away!" I jumped into the car, closed the door and locked it, took a deep breath, and took one last look. To the gas station. The place was still dead, but something was wrong. The signs on the windows looked older, the lights dimmer, and then I saw it on the edge of the forest. Something had moved. No, I walked. I didn't run. It just disappeared into the trees. I stepped on the gas and got out of there without looking back. I didn't slow down until I was miles away. Only then I dared to look in the rearview mirror. The gas station was still visible in the distance, but the lights were completely off. The 24-hour open sign was no longer shining. The building was dark, abandoned, dead. My stomach twisted, pressing the brakes. I put the car in reverse and backed up a few meters to look better. When I focused on the gas station again, it was no longer the same. The paint was even more peeling. The windows were broken. The sign was down. On the overgrown ground looked like no one had set foot there in decades, but I had just been there. My hands gripped the steering wheel. My breathing became erratic. It couldn't be. I had paid for the gas. I had talked to someone. No, my skin stood on end as a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if that place only existed to trap me? I gritted my teeth, put the car in gear, and got out. Shot from there, I didn't look back. I didn't want to look back later. When I got to a town, I stopped at a shiny, real gas station full of cars. Real people. I walked in still shaking and asked the manager, "You know something about the gas station on Route 22? He frowned. "That one has been closed for years." My heart dropped. But I was there. I just filled up with gas. The man looked at me like I was crazy. "That's no, there is gasoline in that place for decades." I was silent. I left the place, got in the car, and started. Since that night, I continue to pass through Route 22, but I never look again at the gas station. And if you ever have to stop at a place that feels wrong, don't go in, don't talk, and above all, don't look back. You never really understand what it means to be alone until you find yourself in a place where no one can reach you. I had always liked the idea of being somewhere remote, away from the noise and chaos of everyday life. So when a friend offered me his family's cabin for a weekend, I accepted without a second thought. A cabin in the mountains, No cell service, no Wi-Fi. Just me, and the silence was exactly what I needed. The road there was long but beautiful. The road meandered through dense forests, with the trees getting taller and tighter as I went along. By the time I arrived, the sun was already beginning to hide behind the mountains, casting long shadows on the ground. The cabin was small and rustic, situated on the edge of a cliff with a breathtaking view of the valley. The air smelled of pine, and the only thing that could be heard was the whisper of the wind among the trees. It was perfect inside. The cabin had everything I needed: a small kitchen, a fireplace, a bedroom on the top floor. There was even a bookshelf full of dusty books that seemed untouched in years. A weekend without distractions, without people. Just what I wanted. The first night passed quietly. I prepared dinner, read a little by the fire, and let the tranquility of the place envelop me. I felt good, but as the night wore on, something changed. It was subtle, barely perceptible, a weight in the air as if the cabin was holding its breath. I ignored it, telling myself it was just my imagination. I wasn't used to this kind of silence in the city. There was always noise, cars, voices, the constant hum of life. There was nothing here. By the time I climbed into bed, the wind outside had intensified, hitting the old wooden blinds. The room was dark, lit only by the dim moonlight filtering through the window. I crawled under the blankets, trying to shake off. The feeling of discomfort was just the wind. It was just the silence. But as I lay there with my eyes fixed on the ceiling, I began to hear something else. At first I thought it was part of the wind, a soft creak, a muffled sound like wood giving way, low pressure. I ignored it. The cabin was old. The wood creaked with a change in temperature. It was normal. But the sound was not coming from the walls. It came from above. I stood completely motionless, holding my breath. There was nothing upstairs, only the attic that had been closed. When I arrived, the creak sounded again, this time followed by a slight sharp blow. I sat up in bed with my heart beating in my chest. Maybe it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a squirrel had gotten inside. Yes, that had to be, but then the sound changed. It wasn't a crack anymore. It was a footstep. My skin stood on end. It couldn't be. The attic was closed. No one else was here. I plucked up the courage and grabbed the flashlight from the bedside table. I slowly got up, feeling the cold ground beneath my feet as I approached the staircase. Each rung creaked under my weight. When I went up the hallway, it was dark. The flashlight barely shone a couple of feet in front of me, and then I stopped in front of the attic door. The sound was still coming from inside. A creak, a scratch. My hand was shaking when I turned the knob. The door didn't move. It was still closed, but the noise continued. It was impossible. There was no way anything was inside. I stayed there with my heart pounding in my ears. The sound stopped. Silence. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. Just the wind outside. I slowly moved away from the door, every fiber of my being screaming at me to come downstairs and lock myself in my room. When I went back to bed, I stayed up for hours with the flashlight in my hand, waiting for the sound to come back. But it didn't. When the cabin dawned, it felt normal. Another once the sunlight came through the windows, illuminating the dust floating in the air. Everything seemed safe, as if the night before had been just a bad dream. I decided not to think about it anymore. I spent the day exploring the surroundings, walking the nearby trails, trying to enjoy the trip. But the more time I spent in the cabin, the more I noticed that something was not right. The objects seemed to move out of place when I was not there. Looking at the doors creaked even though there was no wind. The air inside the house felt heavy, and then the second night came. I went up to the room early, determined to sleep better than the night before. But it didn't take long for the sound in the attic to start again. This time louder. Not a simple creak, slow, deliberate steps. Footsteps that were lived right above me. I could hardly breathe, and then a loud bang, like if something or someone was trying to get out. I jumped out of bed. I didn't care what it was. I didn't want to know. I grabbed my backpack, my keys, and I went down the stairs 2 by 2. I ran to the front door, but when I tried to open it, it didn't move. The lock wasn't on, but the door wouldn't give way. I felt panic take hold of me. Behind me, the bang sounded louder again. I ran to the window, and I opened it tightly, climbing up the windowsill. The cold night air hit me when I jumped to the ground, stumbling in the darkness. I ran to the car, not daring to look back. The keys were shaking in my hands when I managed to start the engine. I stepped on the accelerator. The cabin disappeared in my rearview mirror. I didn't stop driving until I was back in the city. I never told my friend what happened. I don't know what was in that cabin. I don't want to know. All I know is that I wasn't alone. Have you ever come to a place and immediately feel like something's not right? That feeling that what you're seeing can't be right, even though I can't pinpoint exactly why that's what I felt the moment I got out of the car and looked at the lake. The strange thing is that I'd been in that camp dozens of times and there had never been a lake, and yet there it was, calm, dark, spreading out in front of me as if I had always been there. I was on a weekend camping trip with my friend C. We both needed a break, a couple of days away from the chaos of work and life. The camp we had chosen was remote, tucked away in a quiet corner of the forest. What few people I knew, we had been going there for years. Just a clearing in the woods, perfect for pitching a tent with a small stream nearby to get water. No amenities, no crowds, just the peace and quiet we were looking for. We left early that morning, eager to leave the city behind. The road was quiet, winding along rural roads and dense forests, the kind of trip that lulls you to sleep at a comfortable pace. But as we approached the camp, something started to feel strange. The trees looked different, thicker, maybe older, as if the forest had gotten denser since our last visit. And then when we got to the clearing, there was Lake Mark, and I stood there for a moment, just looking at it. He gave me a look, clearly confused. "We went the wrong way?" he asked, although we both knew the answer. I shook his head. "The head number, this is the place, I'm sure." He frowned and looked back at the water. It was eerily still, its surface smooth as a mirror reflecting the sky. The trees on the other side of the lake seemed incredibly tall, their dark forms rising above the water like sentinels. The whole scene felt unreal, like something out of a dream. "I don't recall this being here," Mark muttered, mostly to himself rather than to me. I didn't say it softly, but here it is. We lingered in silence for a few more moments, unsure of what words to share. The lake held an unsettling quality that I couldn't quite put my finger on, leaving me with an inexplicable sense of discomfort. Just that it hadn't been there before. It was the way it looked, too perfect, too still, like it didn't belong. We finally decided to set up camp anyway. After all, we'd driven this far, and didn't it's as if the lake was hurting us. We pitched the tent a little away from the water in the same place we always used, and soon we were sitting by a small campfire trying to get rid of the strange feeling that the appearance of the lake had left us. But that feeling never disappeared as the sun began to set, dyeing the sky a warm orange tone. The lake seemed to change. The immobility of the water, it went from calm to unsettling, as if I were holding my breath waiting for something. The air around us grew colder even though the campfire was burning brightly, and every now and then I thought I saw something move under the surface of the water, a dark shadow barely visible before disappearing again. "You feel that?" Mark asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I nodded without needing to explain it. The air was heavy, oppressive, and the strange calm of the lake was beginning to affect us. We both stood there watching the flames, not to mention the growing uneasiness we felt. I tried to convince myself that it was just the unexpected presence of the lake, just our mind playing tricks, but deep down I knew something was wrong, and it wasn't until later, when the campfire was reduced to fathoms and the stars filled the sky, that things got worse. We were sitting in silence. The only sound was the crackle of the last flames. When we heard it, a splash, we froze. Our eyes immediately went to the lake, the surface that had been smooth and undisturbed all afternoon. Now it had ripples shining in the moonlight. Something had broken the water. Mark stood up, squinting to see better. "What was that? A fish?" I didn't answer. I was staring the water, my heart pounding. The ripples were still there, slowly expanding down the lake, but there was no sign of what had caused them. And then, just as I was about to dismiss it like a pea, some animal, we saw it. A head slowly rose from the surface, almost too slowly, as if I'd been waiting for the music. "You noticed to be pulling it up." My breath stopped when I realized of something chilling. He wasn't swimming, he wasn't floating. He was just standing in the middle of the lake, his body submerged beneath the surface. "You see that?" Mark whispered, his voice tense with fear. I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the figure. He wasn't moving, he was just there, his face hidden behind the curtain of wet hair, his body motionless like the water around him. "We have to go," I whispered, my barely audible voice. "Mark, didn't," he argued. We both stood up hurriedly, our hearts beating against our chests as I backed away from the lake. But then the figure moved slowly, turned his head as if he could sense our fear, and then, with a sudden movement, began to move towards us. No, he did not advance, he slid, he did not tie the water as he approached. He made no noise, he only came closer, his pale face still hidden, His hair dripping on the surface of the lake. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me on. Come on. Now we ran, stumbling. They were too big. They glistened in the gloom, empty like two dark chasms staring straight at me. My heart almost stopped. It was approaching too fast. We got to the car, staggering in the darkness with terror burning in our lungs. Mark searched for the keys with trembling hands, but dropped them to the ground, Jay kneeling to look for them. I couldn't stop looking at the lake. The figure was no longer on the water, but I knew it was still there, looking at us, waiting. I bent down, snatched the keys from the floor, and threw myself towards the driver's door. Come in, screaming, starting the engine with clumsy fingers. Mark dove into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. Just as something emerged from the shore, I didn't look. I didn't want to look. I put in reverse and stepped on the accelerator. The tires drift in the gravel as we drove away to the main road. My pulse still hammers in my ears. Only when we were miles away I dared to slow down. The silence in the car was dense, heavy. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. Finally Mark broke the silence. What the hell was that? He whispered, as if he feared saying it out loud would make him come back. I shook my head. I don't know, and I don't want to know. We never went back to that camp. We didn't even dare to look on maps if that lake had always been there or not. But I've heard stories. People who find bodies of water where there shouldn't be, lakes that appear out of nowhere, are always too still. They're always too perfect, and they're always waiting. If you ever get to a place that feels bad, that seems wrong, listen to us, no ask, just go. I never thought the forest could feel so claustrophobic as a kid. It was always my quiet, open retreat, a place where I could clear my mind, but that changed on this hike. It was supposed to be a quick overnight ride with my friend Matt. Nothing we hadn't done before. Just a chance to disconnect from the world, pitch a tent, and relax in nature. But the deeper we go, the deeper we go. We embarked on our journey at dawn, navigating a well-known path through the thick woods. The sun beamed down, birds chirped melodiously, and our spirits soared as we chatted about everything and nothing, meandering along the winding path through the trees. The trail was clearly marked, and even though it had been a couple of years since our last visit, we believed we could navigate it with ease, until we realized we were mistaken. They started to feel strange at first. I couldn't explain exactly what it was. Perhaps the way the light filtered through the shadows, casting elongated, twisted shadows on the ground, or maybe it was the silence that seemed to settle over the woods as the afternoon wore on. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't as lonely as we thought. We should set up camp soon, Matt said. Looking, the sky darkened. We're losing light. I nodded, wiping the sweat from my forehead as he scans the area. Yes, let's find a good spot. We deviated a bit from the trail, heading for a small clearing we'd passed before. It seemed like a good place to camp, level ground, enough space for our tent, and far enough away from the main trail that we wouldn't be disturbed by other hikers. But while they unpack and we started to pitch the tent, something it seemed strange to me. Hey Matt, I called, my voice echoing in the stillness of the forest. Don't you think this place looks familiar? Matt looked up from where he was driving a stake into the ground, frowning. What do you mean? I hesitated, looking around. It's just that I swear we passed through here before. Well, the trail is there, he said, shrugging his shoulders. Maybe it looks like another clearing. This whole forest looks the same after a while. I deserved, although the restlessness was still latent. Yes, I guess you're right. We finished setting up camp and lit a small fire when the last light of the day disappeared into a deep blue. The forest was silent, too quiet. Normally you would hear crickets, the murmur of the wind among the leaves, or even some animal moving in the undergrowth. But that night the forest was in complete silence. Matt didn't seem noticing it, or if he did, he didn't say anything. We sat around the fire talking quietly and watching the flames dance, but the feeling of being watched never left me after a while. Matt yawned and stretched, throwing another branch into the fire. I'm exhausted, he said. I think I'm going to bed. I nodded, although I didn't feel tired at all. Something in the woods that night made my nerves stand on end, as if the trees hid something just out of sight, but I didn't want to look paranoid, so I forced a smile. Yes, in a while I joined Matt, disappeared into the store, leaving me alone by the fire. The flames flickered, casting trembling shadows on the nearby logs. I stared at the darkness beyond the glow of the fire, my ears attentive to any sound, and then I heard it. At first it was soft, a slight crack between the trees, then another, as if someone was moving in the undergrowth. I straightened up, beating hard. Matt, I called, although I knew it couldn't be him. The sound was coming from the forest behind me. There was no response. The footsteps became more audible. They were heavy, deliberate. My mouth dried up. I turned slowly and grabbed the flashlight from my backpack, lighting up, but the feeling of being watched became even stronger. I took a step back, keeping the light high up in the woods. It was completely silent again, too quiet. Almost expectantly, I turned off the flashlight and went back to the fire. My skin stood on end. I got into the tent quickly and zipped it up. Matt was already sleeping soundly, oblivious to whatever was outside. I lay down next to him, trying to calm my breathing. He was probably an animal, I said to myself. Maybe just my imagination, but I knew that wasn't true, and the worst part was that I felt that whatever was out there was waiting for the night past between restless dreams. Every little sound making me wake up with a start. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that something was standing just outside the store watching us. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted. Matt, on the other hand, woke up fresh and rested, ready to continue. He asked while he was packing his sleeping bag. I nodded, although the thought of staying longer in that forest made me nervous. I just wanted to get out of there. We set off early in the hope of good weather before the sun was too high, but the more we walked, the more the feeling that I wasn't there intensified. Every so often, I heard the rustling of branches behind us, as if someone was walking right behind us. But every time I turned, there was nothing. You hear that? I asked Matt after an hour of walking. My low voice here. What? That sound like someone was following us. Matt stopped and heard for one, frowning. But the forest was completely silent. There's nothing, man, he said, smiling. You're letting go. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was watching us. And then the worst thing happened. We came to a clearing, the same clearing where we'd camped the night before. My stomach sank. No, it can't be, I whispered. Matt looked around, his confidence staggering. It must be another place that looks like it, but I knew it wasn't exactly the same. The fallen log on the edge of the clearing, the way sunlight filtered through the branches. We'd been walking in circles, and no matter what we did, we couldn't get out of the woods. And then in the silence of the clearing, we heard it, a step, then another one closer, and this time Matt heard it too. We stood still, waiting. But in the back of my mind, I already knew the truth. We were never alone in that forest. You know that unsettling feeling when a place that should be full of people is completely empty, like something's wrong. It was exactly what I felt the moment I arrived at the abandoned rest area on Route 78. It wasn't even that late, just past 7 p.m., but the site was completely deserted. There were no cars, there were no lights, just silence. It was as if I had entered a forgotten corner of the world for a moment. I hesitated whether to stop or continue driving. I had been on the road for hours, returning home afterwards from visiting my family in another state. The trip had been smooth, the same monotonous scenery of highway, the same announcements repeated over and over again. I had no intention of stopping, but I had passed by the last gas station and my stomach was growling. My GPS indicated a rest stop a few kilometers ahead, so I decided to take a quick break. I just needed a snack from a vending machine and a few minutes to stretch my legs, but as soon as I parked, I knew something was wrong. The asphalt was cracked with weeds growing between the fissures, as if no one had taken care of the place in years. The building was dark, the window panes were dirty, covered in dust and dirt. The old rest area sign was barely red. The paint, peeled and worn by time, didn't look like a working place, but I still got off the floor. The car felt frigid, infused with the scent of husk and moist earth, and aside from the soft whisper of the wind rustling through the trees, an eerie silence enveloped the surroundings. As I walked up to the vending machine, the sole entity in the entire space that appeared to be alive, its engine emitted a gentle hum, a steady electrical sound that shattered the silence around me. I inserted a handful of coins and eagerly pressed the button for a bag of chips, but to my dismay, nothing occurred. I struck the side of the machine cursing quietly. A second later, the bag fell with a thud so hard that it made me jump. I let out a nervous laugh, shaking my head. It was just an old machine, nothing to worry about. But then I heard a soft sound, a shuffling, as if something was sliding on the ground near the building. I turned around immediately with my heart racing, but there was nothing, just the darkness of the area and the empty road beyond. Hello, I called, feeling ridiculous. Nothing, just the wind. I took a deep breath and decided to use the bathroom before continuing on my way. I pushed the door of the public toilet open with a screech inside. The lights flickered faintly, casting distorted shadows on the cracked tiles. The place smelled of damp and disuse. I didn't want to stay there longer than necessary. While I washed my hands, I heard it again, but this time I was just outside the bathroom. My skin stood on end. I turned off the faucet and stood motionless, listening to the sound. Absolute silence. Stopped. I approached the door and opened it a little. Looking outside, The parking area was still empty. The shadows of the trees were lengthening with the waning light. There was no one, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I hurried my way back to my car, my pulse beating in my temples. Just as I put the key in the lock, I heard it again, the drag closer, almost right behind me. I turned suddenly, and there I was, in the corner of the parking lot at the edge of the forest. Something was moving, a tall shadow, motionless, watching me, my heart hammering in my chest. His face remained hidden, a shadowy outline faintly discernible against the backdrop of the trees. It stood still, its gaze fixed on me. "Who is it?" My voice came out softer than I had hoped. Silence lingered in the air. The wind whispered through the branches, causing them to rustle and flicker, as the figure vanished into thin air. I took action without hesitation. I opened the car door, got inside and locked the locks with a blow, started the engine and reversed quickly. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I took a look at the rearview mirror in the parking lot. It was empty, but that didn't calm me down. I sped down the road with my eyes fixed on the asphalt lit by my headlights. I drove for almost an hour before stopping at a well-lit gas station when I got out of the car. My legs were shaking. I went inside and walked over to the counter. The clerk, an older man with a bored expression, looked up when I approached. "Excuse me," I said, still out of breath. "You know something about the rest area on Route 78? His face changed. He straightened up slightly with his eyes half closed. "You stopped there?" I nodded. The man shook his head slowly. "You shouldn't have done that." My stomach churned while the man rested his elbows on the counter and lowered his voice. "That place has been closed for years. No one uses it." A chill ran down my spine. "But the vending machine worked." The man stared at me. "Yes, it works, but that doesn't mean it should work." My mouth dried. I saw something there. The man didn't seem surprised. "Everyone who stops there does." My skin stood on end. "What is the man?" He just looked at me. His grim expression. "I don't know, and I don't want to know." I swallowed. It took me a moment to catch my breath before heading back to my car. As I left the station, I looked at my hands, at a shaky on the steering wheel. I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow on the road, watching me, waiting for me. There are places in the world we shouldn't visit. Forgotten corners where something ancient and unknown has still done that. Resting area is one of those places, and I'll never stop there again.